In 1923 Germany, a concert pianist with a PhD and a plumber walked into the same economic collapse. The pianist had spent 15 years mastering Beethoven. He had diplomas on the wall, a prestigious reputation, and a salary that just 2 years earlier made him the envy of his neighborhood. The plumber had calluses on his hands, a beat-up toolbox, and absolutely zero diplomas. By the end of that year, the pianist was trading his Steinway grand piano for a bag of potatoes. The plumber? He was charging in bread loaves, fixing pipes for farmers, and eating better than most government officials. Now here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if the skills we've been told to chase, the degrees, the titles, the LinkedIn badges, are actually the most fragile things we own? And what if the skills that look basic or beneath us are the ones that have quietly survived every single economic collapse in recorded history? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at your skill set very differently. And maybe, just maybe, you'll finally learn how to fix that leaky tap. Let's start with something that sounds almost too simple. When economies collapse, things still break. Pipes burst, cars die, roofs leak, shoes wear out, machines stop working. And here's the thing about a collapsing economy. Nobody's buying new stuff. They're fixing old stuff. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, the U.S. saw a massive surge in what economists now call the repair economy. Cobblers, people who fix shoes, were booked out for weeks. Tailors who could patch and alter clothing were making more than some bank managers. Mechanics who could keep a 1928 Ford running were treated like local heroes. Think about that. The economy had just fallen off a cliff. Unemployment hit 25%. And yet, the guy who could fix your carburetor was doing just fine. Why? Because repair skills are what Nassim Taleb would call anti-fragile. They don't just survive chaos, they thrive in it. When new goods become unaffordable, the person who can extend the life of old goods becomes essential infrastructure. This pattern repeated itself in Argentina in 2001 when the peso collapsed overnight. Mechanics, electricians, and plumbers who had previously been underpaid suddenly found themselves operating in a barter economy where their skills were the currency. One Buenos Aires electrician famously traded rewiring a family's home for 6 months of groceries. 6 months of groceries! Meanwhile, the marketing consultant next door was trying to figure out how to barter a PowerPoint presentation. The lesson here isn't go become a plumber. The lesson is this: skills that fix, maintain, and extend the life of physical things have a floor value that never hits zero, even when the currency does. The food chain, the oldest hedge fund in human history. Here's a fun fact that will ruin your next dinner party conversation. During the Soviet collapse in the early 1990s, Russia experienced what economists politely call supply chain disintegration. The shelves were empty, the ruble was worthless, and people were genuinely unsure where their next meal was coming from. But one group barely noticed: the dacha gardeners. For decades, Soviet citizens had maintained small garden plots outside the city. The government looked down on it as a peasant habit, embarrassing for a modern socialist state. But when the collapse came, those gardens fed families. By 1992, private plots covering less than 3% of agricultural land were producing over 90% of Russia's potatoes and more than half its vegetables. 3% of the land, 90% of the potatoes. That's not a fun fact, that's a survival statistic. Same story in Cuba's special period after 1993. Havana residents turned parking lots and rooftops into food gardens. The people who knew how to grow food became community pillars overnight. The skill of growing food predates money, banks, and the concept of a career. It's the oldest economic hedge in human history. You don't need to become a farmer, but knowing how to grow something, even herbs on a windowsill, connects you to a supply chain no central bank can inflate away.
Let's continue with the knowledge arbitrage, the person who understood two systems. Now we get into something a little more sophisticated, and honestly, a little more exciting. Every economic collapse creates a gap between the official economy and the real economy. In Weimar, Germany, the official exchange rate was a joke. The real rate was negotiated in back alleys and coffee shops by people who understood both the German mark and foreign currencies. These informal currency traders, sometimes called monetary translators, became indispensable. In Argentina, 2001, the arbolitos, literally little trees, named because they stood on street corners like planted fixtures, were the people who could exchange pesos for dollars at real market rates. They weren't criminals, they were filling a gap that the broken official system couldn't. In Lebanon's ongoing financial collapse, which began in 2019, the people who understood how to move money across borders, how to use crypto as a bridge currency, how to navigate both the official lira rate and the black market rate, those people became the most sought-after financial advisors in the country. Not the ones with CFA certifications, the ones with practical knowledge of how broken systems actually work. This is what I call knowledge arbitrage, the ability to understand two systems simultaneously and translate between them. It's not just about currency. It applies to understanding both formal employment and freelance or gig structures, knowing how to operate in both digital and cash economies, being able to navigate both institutional healthcare and community-based care. The person who can operate fluently in two economic realities at once is never truly trapped in either one. Now let's talk about the trust economy, the skill that scales when institutions collapse. Here's one that surprises people the most. When institutions collapse, banks, governments, supply chains, what fills the vacuum? Trust networks. And the skill of building, maintaining, and leveraging trust networks is one of the most consistently valuable skills across every collapse in history. In Zimbabwe's hyperinflation crisis between 2007 and 2009, when the Zimbabwe dollar became so worthless that the government literally printed a $100 trillion note, formal commerce essentially stopped. What replaced it? Community networks. People who were known, trusted, and connected. The local butcher who had relationships with 3 farmers. The woman who knew which families had generators and which ones needed them. The mechanic who had a reputation for honesty in a world where honesty had become a competitive advantage. These weren't just nice people, they were economic nodes. They were the connective tissue of a functioning microeconomy inside a macroeconomic disaster. In Venezuela today, the same pattern holds. The informal economy, estimated at over 40% of all economic activity, runs almost entirely on personal reputation and trust networks. Your word, your track record, your relationships, these are the collateral. The modern equivalent of this skill is community capital. The ability to be genuinely useful to people around you, to build a reputation for reliability, and to maintain relationships that aren't purely transactional. In a world obsessed with personal branding and follower counts, the most durable brand you can build is the one your neighbors, colleagues, and community hold in their heads about you. Finally, the meta skill, learning how to learn. We've talked about repair skills, food production, knowledge arbitrage, and trust networks. But there's one skill that sits above them all, the one that made every person in every collapse we've discussed adaptable rather than just prepared. The ability to learn new skills quickly. This sounds obvious, but it's actually rare. Most people learn skills in a very specific context, a job, a school, a structured environment, and struggle to transfer that learning to new contexts.
The people who survived and thrived in economic collapses were disproportionately people who had a habit of learning outside their comfort zone. The pianist who survived Weimar Germany wasn't the one who kept practicing Beethoven. It was the one who picked up a second skill, maybe bookkeeping, maybe language translation, and applied it when the concert halls closed. In modern terms, this means deliberately building what researchers call a T-shaped skill set, deep expertise in one area combined with broad functional knowledge across many others. Not a jack of all trades, not a narrow specialist, a T-shape, deep enough to be valuable, wide enough to be adaptable. Here's what history is actually telling us. Economic collapses don't destroy value, they redistribute it. They strip away the artificial value, the credentials, the titles, the institutional salaries, and reveal the underlying value, the real stuff, the stuff that was always there. The plumber in 1923 Leipzig didn't get lucky. He had something that couldn't be inflated away, couldn't be made redundant by a bank run, couldn't be wiped out by a government policy. He had a skill that the physical world needed. The question isn't whether another economic shock is coming. History is pretty clear on that one. They always come. The question is, when the next one arrives, what do you have that the physical world actually needs? Start there.